In a small American town, an old woman named Jessica was despised by everyone. People whispered behind her back, judged her for her appearance, and avoided her at all costs. No one ever tried to know her story. But when she passed away, something shocking was discovered, something that left the whole town in tears. The truth was far from what they had assumed. What had they missed all these years? This story exposes the harsh reality of racism, prejudice, and the pain of being judged unfairly. Watch till the end to see how one woman's untold truth changed everything. Stay tuned for an emotional journey that will change the way you see others. The streets of Willowbrook were quiet, but whenever Jessica walked past, murmurs followed her. People whispered about the old black woman who lived alone in the rundown house at the end of Elm Street. Some called her a witch, others claimed she was dangerous. Children were warned not to go near her home, and adults treated her with silent contempt. Jessica never responded to their hate. She simply walked with her head held high, ignoring the glares and the hushed voices. She had lived in Willowbrook for decades, but no one ever took the time to know her. Her presence was an unspoken stain on the town, and people wished she would just disappear. One day, Jessica entered the local grocery store, where the stairs felt heavier than usual. The cashier, a young woman named Emily, sighed when she saw her approaching. "Great, her again!" Emily muttered under her breath. Jessica placed a few essentials on the counter, her hands slightly trembling. As she reached for her wallet, Emily rolled her eyes and snatched the money from her hand. "You should just stay home," she muttered. "No one wants you here." Jessica paused, looking up at the young woman. For a brief moment, pain flickered in her deep brown eyes. But she said nothing. Instead, she took her groceries and left, walking slowly down the street with the weight of loneliness pressing down on her. No one knew that this would be the last time Jessica would be seen alive. That night, as the wind howled through the empty streets, Jessica's house remained dark and silent. The next morning, the news spread like wildfire. Jessica had passed away in her sleep. At first, no one cared. But then, something unexpected happened. Something that would shake Willowbrook to its core. The morning after Jessica's death, Willowbrook woke up to an eerie silence. The woman they had whispered about for years was gone. But no one mourned. The town's newspaper printed a small obituary, just a few lines buried between local sports scores and ads for used furniture. People skimmed over it without a second thought. "Good riddance," an elderly man muttered at the diner. "She never belonged here anyway," someone else added. Even the local church, which usually helped the needy, didn't bother organizing a funeral. Jessica had been an outcast, and now she was just another forgotten soul. Or so they thought. That afternoon, something strange happened. A black car pulled into town, a sleek, expensive vehicle that looked out of place in their quiet streets. From it stepped a well-dressed black man, his sharp suit contrasting the dusty sidewalks. His presence turned heads. He walked straight into City Hall, demanding to speak with the mayor. Within an hour, the news spread. Jessica had a secret, and it was something that would make the entire town question everything they thought they knew about her. That evening, a team of journalists arrived, cameras in hand, knocking on doors, asking about Jessica's life. Now people wanted to know her story. But was it too late? What had they missed all these years? The truth was about to be uncovered, and Willowbrook wasn't ready for it. Willowbrook had never seen so much attention surrounding a woman they had ignored for decades. Whispers filled the air as the well-dressed black man made his way through town, his every step commanding curiosity. When he finally reached City Hall, he handed a thick, sealed envelope to the mayor. The mayor's hands trembled as he read the contents. His face turned pale. The letter was from Jessica, and inside was the truth that the entire town had overlooked. "To those who never looked past my skin." Jessica's words, written in shaky but determined handwriting, told a story no one expected. Decades ago, Jessica had been one of the few black women in Willowbrook. She had arrived as a young, ambitious teacher, eager to educate the children of the town. But the town wasn't ready for her. Parents refused to send their children to her class. Neighbors avoided her, whispering cruel words under their breath. The school principal, under pressure from the town, fired her without cause. Instead of leaving, Jessica stayed. She worked odd jobs, lived in a small rundown house, and kept to herself. Not because she wanted to, but because no one ever let her in. For years, she watched from afar as the children she once dreamed of teaching grew up, went to college, and started families. She had no family of her own, because Willowbrook never gave her the chance. The truth no one saw coming. As the mayor read the letter aloud, the town fell into a stunned silence. Then came the final blow. Jessica had been rich. She wasn't just some poor, lonely old woman. She had been wealthy beyond their imagination. And now she was leaving her entire fortune behind. But not for the town. The mysterious black man who had come to Willowbrook was Jessica's lawyer. He had arrived to carry out her final wish. Her entire estate, millions of dollars, was to be donated to an organization that fought against racial injustice. The people who ignored her, the ones who turned their backs when she needed help, would get nothing. Jessica had spent her life watching, remembering, and waiting. Now, even in death, she had the final word. The town had judged her for years. Now, they were the ones being judged. And for the first time in their lives, they finally felt the weight of their actions. The weight of Jessica's letter hung over Willowbrook like a storm cloud. People who had once ignored her now spoke her name with guilt. Those who had laughed at her misfortune now felt a heavy silence pressing against their chests. For years, they had refused to see her humanity. Now, they could no longer escape the truth. We were wrong. The mayor, his face still pale, turned to the townspeople. His voice trembled as he spoke. We let this happen, he admitted. Jessica was one of us, and we turned our backs on her. A hush fell over the crowd. No one could deny it. Sarah, the owner of the local bakery, wiped a tear from her eye. She came in every morning for coffee, she whispered. I never once asked how she was doing. Old Mr. Peterson, who had lived across from Jessica for 40 years, shook his head in disbelief. She always smiled at me, he murmured, and I never smiled back. It was a painful realization. They had all played a part in Jessica's isolation. Now she was gone, and it was too late to say, I'm sorry. She remembered everything. Whispers spread about Jessica's wealth. People couldn't believe that the woman they had seen as a poor, lonely outsider had actually been richer than all of them. She could have left this town. She could have had a better life somewhere else. But Jessica had stayed. Why? Because she had once believed in them. She had hoped for change. But Willowbrook had let her down. And in her final act, she made sure the world knew it. Regret turns to action. Not everyone in Willowbrook could live with the guilt. Nathan, a young schoolteacher, felt the burden of the town's past deep in his soul. She wanted to teach, he said one evening at a town meeting, and we stole that from her. He couldn't erase the past, but he could fight for the future. That night, he proposed a radical idea. Jessica's name should never be forgotten. He urged the town to rename the school in her honor, a place where every child, no matter their background, would be welcomed. Some resisted. We can't change the past, an older woman muttered. Nathan's voice was firm, but we can change the future. The town had spent years ignoring Jessica's presence. Now, they would spend the rest of their lives remembering her name. The weight of Jessica's story had changed Willowbrook forever. People who had once whispered cruel words about her now spoke her name with reverence. Those who had ignored her in the streets now wished they could turn back time. But regret alone wasn't enough. If Jessica's story had taught them anything, it was that actions mattered more than words. The town makes a decision. Nathan, the schoolteacher, stood at the town meeting, his hands gripping the podium tightly. I know we can't undo what we did to Jessica, he said, his voice filled with emotion. but we can make sure no one else is treated the way she was." Silence filled the room. Then, a voice spoke up. "I agree," Sarah, the bakery owner, said, standing from her chair. "We can't change the past, but we can change how we move forward." The mayor, once hesitant, now nodded. "Jessica's letter wasn't just a reminder of our mistakes," he admitted. "It was a challenge. To be better." That night, the town made a historic decision. They would rename the school in Jessica's honor, Jessica Holloway Academy, a place where every child, no matter their race, status, or background, would be treated with the kindness that Jessica never received. An unexpected visitor. As the town prepared for the school's dedication ceremony, a mysterious man arrived in Willowbrook. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his hair graying at the temples. He walked through the town square, his sharp eyes taking in the banners bearing Jessica's name. The townspeople watched him with curiosity. Finally, he stopped in front of Nathan. "Are you the man who led the effort to rename the school?" he asked. Nathan nodded. "Yes, sir." The man smiled, though sadness lingered in his eyes. "You don't know me," he said, "but Jessica was my sister." Gasps echoed through the crowd. The truth about Jessica's past. The man, Michael Holloway, explained everything. "Jessica and I grew up in this town," he revealed. "But when she was still a child, our parents sent me away to live with distant relatives." He shook his head. "Jessica wrote me letters about how things had changed after I left, how people started treating her differently, how she felt, invisible." The townspeople lowered their heads in shame. "I tried to convince her to leave," Michael continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But she always said the same thing. This is my home, and maybe, one day, they'll see me for who I really am." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "She never stopped believing in us," she whispered. Michael nodded. "And now, you're proving that she was right to believe." Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. "My sister left this for the town," he said, "and I think it's time you read it." Jessica's final words were about to be revealed, and no one in Willowbrook was prepared for what they were about to hear. Section 6, Jessica's final words. A town's awakening. The air in Willowbrook was heavy with anticipation as Michael Holloway held up the envelope. It was old, its edges worn from time. But the message inside? It would change everything. Michael took a deep breath before unfolding the letter. His hands trembled as he began to read. Jessica's letter, to the people of Willowbrook. "If you're reading this, then my time in this world has come to an end. I don't know if you will remember me as the woman who lived in silence, or if you will even care that I am gone. But before you dismiss my story, I ask you to listen for just a moment longer. I wasn't always invisible. I wasn't always alone. Once, I was a little girl who ran through these streets, just like your children do now. I had dreams, just like they do. I had a heart full of hope. But somewhere along the way, I became something else in your eyes. Someone who didn't belong. I saw the way you whispered when I walked past. I felt the doors that closed before I could even knock. And I learned that no matter how much I tried to be kind, to smile, to give, it was never enough. But I never hated you. Not even once." At this, several people gasped. Some lowered their heads in shame. Nathan, the teacher, wiped his eyes. Michael continued reading. "In my final days, I wondered if I had made a mistake by staying in Willowbrook. But deep down, I always believed that maybe, one day, you would see me. Not as an outsider, not as someone to be ignored, but as a person, just like you. If today is that day, then I have no regrets. But if it's not, I hope that one day you'll find it in your hearts to change. Not just for me, but for anyone who has ever felt unwanted, anyone who has ever been made to feel less, and for the children who will grow up here after I'm gone. Because the truth is, kindness costs nothing, and yet it can change everything. I hope you choose kindness. With all my heart, Jessica Holloway. By the time Michael finished reading, there wasn't a single dry eye in the crowd. Sarah, the bakery owner, sobbed into her hands. The mayor wiped his face before stepping forward. "We failed her," he admitted. "Jessica gave us her whole life, and we never gave her anything in return." "But it's not too late," Nathan said. "We can still honor her. We can still make sure her message lives on." Michael nodded. "That's why I'm here. Jessica left something else behind." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second envelope. "This is her final request." The crowd held its breath. No one knew what it would say, but they knew one thing for certain. Whatever Jessica had asked for, they would do it. No matter what. The truth would finally be revealed. What was Jessica's final request? Would the town be able to fulfill her last wish? The town of Willowbrook stood in absolute silence as Michael Holloway held the second envelope. Jessica had spent decades ignored, unseen, and unwelcome. But now, at this moment, everyone was listening. Michael slowly opened the letter, his voice trembling as he read her last request. "To the people of Willowbrook, I never needed your pity. I never wanted revenge. All I ever wished for was something simple, belonging. I have no family left to mourn me, no children to pass on my story. But before I go, I ask one last thing of you. Turn the house at the edge of town into something beautiful. Make it a place where no one is turned away, a shelter, a home, a refuge for those who have nowhere else to go. Let it be the kindness I never received. Let it be proof that people can change. Do this, and I will finally rest in peace. With hope, Jessica Holloway." Tears streamed down faces as Michael finished reading. Nathan, the teacher, felt a deep ache in his chest. He had spent years teaching children about kindness, yet Jessica had spent her life suffering in silence, right before his eyes. "We must do this," Nathan said firmly. "Not out of guilt, but because it's the right thing to do." The mayor stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We will grant Jessica's final wish. That house will become a sanctuary for anyone in need. No one in Willowbrook will ever be made to feel like an outsider again." Applause erupted, not just as a promise to Jessica, but as a commitment to change. The bakery owner, Sarah, volunteered to donate food. The local carpenter offered to rebuild the house. The people who had once ignored Jessica now stood together, ready to honor her memory in the only way that mattered, by making sure no one else suffered the way she had. A new beginning, months later, Jessica's house stood transformed. A bright sign was placed above the door. "Jessica's Haven, a home for all." People from all walks of life found shelter within those walls, the lost, the lonely, the forgotten. And every time someone crossed the threshold, they were greeted with the same words carved into the entrance. "Kindness costs nothing, yet it can change everything." Jessica was gone. But her legacy? It would live on forever. One evening, Nathan stood outside Jessica's Haven, watching as a young girl and her mother entered the shelter. A gentle wind blew past him, rustling the leaves. For just a moment, he could almost hear Jessica's voice, soft, peaceful, free. "Thank you." And as he looked up at the stars, he whispered back, "We finally see you, Jessica." Enjoyed this story? Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales. Let's spread the message of hope and unity together. Thanks and take care.